The views and opinions expressed on this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of the network, producers, advertisers, or hosts, and belong solely to those who make them. Truth Frequency is a non-biased and non-partisan platform committed to presenting all aspects of the truth and allowing you, the listener, to decide for yourself.
31 seconds, and we're gone for auto sequence start.
This is David Icke, and you're tapped into the Truth Frequency with Chris and Cherie.
It's called being in the zone. It's called, being lucky. It's called having everything go your way.
When you deal with computers, you deal with ones and zeros. And the only way that you can make a computer more powerful is to expand the consciousness of the computer.
Well, it's something bigger than ourselves, and that's got to be said.
That has to do with the self-image that people have.
It's just kind of your ego being swept aside, or being kind of stomped on, or being swatted like a fly.
People are waking up to that en masse in such an incredible way, and it's something that I guess when we're involved in this, we maybe lose the forest for the trees, but it really is and truly happening at a societal level.
It is being able to take what feels like ordinary human energy and mastering extraordinary power, even with a single person in a society with this kind of power. We call it the X factor.
The universe is not only stranger than you imagine, the universe is stranger than you can imagine.
And guess what, guys? Here we are.
And here we are, ladies and gentlemen, once again on American Freedom Radio and simulcasting on Polygraph Radio. This is your host, Chris Gio, and I'm joined as always by my lovely co-host, Cherie, and you are tapped into the Truth Frequency. It is Monday, August 30th, 2010, and we have a special presentation for you today. Joining us in a few minutes is Dr. Stephen Greer. I'm very honored that he agreed to come on the broadcast. I've got a lot of questions for him. We're going to delve into a little bit about the physics of consciousness, and maybe get into some UFOs, too. He's the head of the Disclosure Project. He's the head of the Orion Project as well. So it's going to be a very, very interesting conversation, especially with all this rhetoric that's been going around that these aliens are out to get us. It was Hawkins, I think it was, that said that...
Stephen Hawking, yeah.
Yep, Hawking, that's it. Who said that aliens are coming to get us and we all have to fear these aliens. And it's really a fear-based situation that they're trying to bring forth. And Bill Cooper talked about this as well, and I've always wondered about Bill because I read Behold a Pale Horse. There was a lot of UFO info there, but then I heard that he actually denounced all of that, and I finally found the documents where he did actually denounce all of that and said,
cool.
You know what, I was completely wrong. There's no benevolent beings that are coming to get us, and so the real threat is this New World Order. And I think what they want to keep us from is this global shift in consciousness, which we're experiencing, and we should be experiencing here in 2012. It's the dawning of this global shift in consciousness.
I would like to think that they're benevolent. On the one hand, you have to look at the fact that they are more technologically advanced than we are. So maybe their consciousness is expanded and they are able to communicate with us, and they don't want to be mean and they don't want to invade us and hurt us. But on the other hand, you have to look at how much the New World Order has been able to accomplish just by tricking us into thinking that they work for us. So both sides of the coin you got to look at.
Absolutely, absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, everybody tuning in, I know we have a lot of listeners from India, Europe, all around the world. We actually have a poll on the front page of truthfrequencyradio.com. We're thinking about moving the normal broadcast from Sunday at 9 p.m. Central to Saturday, 7 o'clock Central, so we can just have a better time for everybody to listen and participate in the chat, because that's the whole point of the show is the interaction between us and the listeners.
Absolutely.
And that's what really makes a great show, in my opinion.
I think so too. It wouldn't even be a show if it weren't for you guys, really. Y'all are great listeners.
Absolutely. So far, everybody's voting for Saturday at 7, so we're going to get with Danny, see if he's going to let us do that, and if so, we might go ahead and move the broadcast back to the other time. But anyways, we're going to see you on the other side with Dr. Stephen Greer, Chris and Cherie on truthfrequencyradio.com. American Freedom is, of course, our network. back at truthfrequencyradio.com, of course, going out through the airwaves on American Freedom Radio. And joining us on the line, we have the legend himself, Dr. Stephen Greer, the director of the Disclosure Project and the Orion Project. He was the first to coin the term close encounters of the fifth kind and teach people how to initiate contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. He's written several books, his latest being Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge back in 2006, and he's also a lecturer who's appearing at the CSETI conference in Rio Rico, Arizona in just a few months from now. And that's going to be an absolutely amazing conference. I mean, amazing lineup. Dr. Greer, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to be with you.
You have the conference coming up in just a couple of months. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that before we get into it?
Yes, well, it's titled Contact, Countdown to Transformation, and it's in Rio Rico, Arizona, which is south of Tucson, Arizona, from October 2nd to the 4th, and we're going to have Richard C. Hoagland of the Enterprise Mission, and myself and Colin Andrews, who coined the term crop circle, and Dr. Ted Loader, who's our PhD scientist for the OrionProject.org, who is going to be talking about the new energy developments and alternative energy that deal with a lot of the classified areas of energy and propulsion that the public don't know about and need to know about, because that's really the future of freedom from the Mideast oil cartels.
I completely agree. We definitely need to get off of the oil, but I think it's going to take a global shift in consciousness to do that, where we realize that there's more technology out there, and everybody realizes that there's no disclosure. One thing that I heard you speaking with Richard Hoagland, and you mentioned the physics of consciousness, and that really just grabbed my interest because that seems to echo exactly what we talk about on this broadcast, but you break it down from a scientific perspective rather than a spiritual perspective. Can you enlighten our listeners a little bit with that?
Well, yes, I mean, it's both. And we, if you go to cseti.org, cseti.org, we have a lot of information about this, because whether you're looking at the ancient Vedas and the teachings in consciousness or modern physics, there's a nexus where an understanding of what I would call non-locality or conscious awareness as it exist beyond linear space-time. And it does have to do with the physics, because when you're dealing with these energy systems that deal with so-called zero-point energy or free energy, you're really tapping into a hyperdimensional physics that's very related to these other dimensions. And consciousness is, of course, the foundation, I think, of what all of space-time matter is emanating from. And I mean, some people would call this a supreme being, but in reality, rather than anthropocentrically sort of framing it in that way, I would say that the conscious mind itself is always an infinite field of awareness and energy, and it actually then passes through various dimensions all the way into space-time and matter. And so the studies that have been done are very clear on this. Dr. John at Princeton's Engineering Anomalies Research Lab and I spoke years ago about this, that in fact even what we think of as inanimate objects can be affected by thought and awareness, that there is no place in the cosmos where consciousness isn't the primal operative paradigm. And so this does inform sort of where we're heading as a civilization, and this understanding you get to very quickly once you start dealing with these new energy systems that deal with transdimensional or interdimensional systems. And in fact, we have found that there is a nexus where all of those areas of study come together, where you want to look at it spiritually or in terms of science. There's very much a science of consciousness that is the foundation, I think, of the whole next millennium of human evolution on this planet.
Well, you're absolutely right. I've always said that science is the how, it's not the who, and they both go hand in hand. Right, exactly. And in fact, you know, what we're finding amongst the more open-minded and forward-looking scientists all over the world, and this has been going on now for 30 or 40 years, is that they're stumbling across phenomena that can only be explained by a conscious universe. And when I was talking some years ago with astronaut Ed Mitchell, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon, he and I were talking about this, and in terms of the universe itself being a conscious hologram, and that, in fact, every point in space and time is accessible
to any other point in space or time through this integrating aspect of conscious mind. And this is very Vedic, by the way, if you look at the ancient Sanskrit teachings of the Vedas. And before I was a medical doctor, I was actually a meditation teacher and used to actually tutor people in Sanskrit and this sort of thing. And what I found is that there's a great deal of concordance between these higher levels of consciousness and understanding and the kind of physics that we're coming into. And I think that this is certainly known by any interstellar civilization. One of the things I point out, and actually I just wanted to correct your introduction, the most recent book that's come out in the last 12 months is called Contact, Countdown to Transformation, and it has a summary of the 18 years of contact our research team has had, and you can get that at disclosureproject.org. But that book has a DVD with it that shows these extraordinary trans-dimensional craft coming right into the site with us, and tones and all kinds of amazing phenomenon. And it really points to the kind of physics that we're talking about, and which I think probably very ancient peoples had observed and maybe didn't understand it scientifically, but we're at the point where we're going to actually launch into a scientific understanding of this.
I think that's amazing. But what's more amazing to me is that how long they've known about this and kept it from the public.
Yeah, well, I got involved with this. As you may know, my uncle designed the lunar module. He was the senior project engineer at Grumman that built the lunar module. And we did go to the moon, by the way. However, when we went to the moon, what happened is that what actually transpired was hidden from the American people. In fact, I've spoken to close relatives of both Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin who have confirmed to me that when we landed, and of course I knew this already, that there were extraterrestrial vehicles there watching us and watching what we were doing. And I think that this is something which, because I'm in Washington a great deal, a lot of people kind of whisper about, but no one wants to talk about it. It's sort of the orphan subject because people are afraid of being ridiculed. But in reality, when I've met with members of the Senate and senior members of the Senate Intelligence Committee or people at the Pentagon, they take this very, very seriously. They just don't want to talk publicly about it. And one of the problems that keeps them from talking about it is the secrecy you're talking about, and that is sort of complete subversion of the Constitution. And what's happened is exactly what Eisenhower warned us about when he said, beware of the military-industrial complex. And what he was talking about, he wasn't anti-military, he was a five-star general. He was talking about the fact that there were these transnational corporate interests that would absolutely betray us and keep a lot of things secret that we should know about, and that would subvert our way of life and our democracy. And actually, I live very near Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home, and if you look at what Thomas Jefferson wrote in the early founding days of the United States, he warned about the unchecked power of corporate interests trumping the interests of the people. And, Thomas Jefferson was extremely prescient in his warning. And, of course, unfortunately, these warnings have not been heeded adequately. We're trying to correct that through the disclosureproject.org. But I think that what most people don't realize is that the secrecy isn't because they think people are going to hurl themselves off the Brooklyn Bridge because we're not alone in the universe. It's because the science and physics that we start talking about would completely
erase,
change the sort of what I call the petro-Nazis' lock on the world. I mean, you look at how this world is running or being run into the ground, and it's because of the transnational corporate energy, oil, and petrodollar financial interests. It isn't what's possible technically. I mean, I recently met with a man who's one of the highest-ranking people in the Department of Defense lab system, and he told me that he has seen these sort of so-called free energy and anti-gravity systems. And the problem is that the reason these haven't been disclosed, and the reason we're still burning oil in our cars and heating our homes that way and burning coal for 50% of our electricity in this country, is because there's about a $600 trillion base of commodities that are traded on what's in the ground in coal and oil and gas, and they don't want that system to change to where every single person, we the people, would have energy for our house and our car that you can't put a meter on. Right. And this is not a conspiracy theory. This we can actually prove scientifically. And I think that what people don't understand is that it isn't the fact that there might be life out there that's the big issue. 70-some% of the public believe there is. It's because if you say they're here and they're moving around in our skies in these extraordinary things we call UFOs, And then what you're going to find is that scientists would then say, if officialdom acknowledge this, well, how are they moving around? How are they going from one star system to another? And there you've just cracked open this bottle, and the genie's out. And with that would come a complete transformation of life on Earth, which I think is what needs to happen. But if you own $1 trillion oil field, you're probably not thrilled about this prospect. So it's a big geopolitical and macroeconomic issue.
Absolutely. I think I remember Tesla saying something, building a free energy machine.
Yeah, building a free energy machine.
And J.P. Morgan said, where do I put the meter?
J.P. Morgan said this will not come out unless we can put a meter on it. Also, Old Man Westinghouse got involved with this, of what's now Westinghouse Corporation. And, of course, as you know, General Electric was started by Edison, but then got taken over by other people. And all of these interests, along with the Rockefeller family way back in the early part of the century, said, look, we do not want this out. And what people need to understand is that people like Tesla and Stubblefield and T. Townsend Brown, and if you go to the OrionProject.org, you'll see all these historical references, had developed some aspects of this over the last 100 years. The problem has been that whether it was 75 years ago or now, there are so many vested, powerful economic interests that do not want this out, because it would completely not just change how we get power, but metaphorically, it would change the power dynamics on the planet. Because right now there are 200 or 300 corporations and families that literally have half of the net worth of the world under their control.
And don't want to lose that.
That is a true statistic, and it blows people's minds. And it's the greatest asymmetry in wealth in the history of the world right now. And so the problem has become, how do you have that change where these people can loosen their grip on this? Because if they don't loosen their grip on it, we're strangling the life out of the planet. We're enmeshed in this situation in the Middle East, this endless war scenario. We're having all these problems environmentally, and the world is increasingly impoverished by this. And you have 7 billion people. There's simply no way that all of them can have air conditioning and drive around in cars, because we're really going to run up against the limits of what we can do with the zero-sum game of fossil fuels and oil and gas and coal. So these new technologies are the solution. But as one policy wonk told me last year in Washington, yes, but these are too good. I said, what do you mean they're too good? And he said, they're too good because we just want to tinker around the edges with a little bit of wind power and solar power, but we really don't want something this revolutionary. I said, look, we're out of time to tinker around the edges. Tinkering around the edges would have been fine 50 years ago. Now we need to make some serious changes.
Absolutely.
I completely agree with you. We have a Walmart here that's supposed to be, a green Walmart, and it's got the wind power stuff, and I'm like,
right.
What is this? This is a joke. It is a joke.
I was telling someone recently, to put just solar on my house so it would really run completely just with solar. And I'm not way up north. I'm here in Central Virginia. It would cost over $100,000. Now, most Americans are not going to plop $100,000 into a solar farm for their house. And so in terms of practical solutions, these things are, I guess it's better than nothing. But when you think about the fact that we can prove that there have been, and I've asked the president, there's some people very close to President Obama that I work with, where I've provided briefing materials to, and I said, look, you've got to really issue, and actually this letter to the president is up at disclosureproject.org, where we say that we need an emancipation proclamation, a new one, that basically says we're going to have to liberate our people and the world from the shackles of this economic slavery that is running the earth into the ground. And it isn't a matter of whether it can be done. We know it can. It's a matter of whether there's the moral courage and the leadership to get this task accomplished. And actually, this is why myself and Dr. Bravo and Dr. Loader have left our day jobs as physicians and scientists at universities and stuff to work on this, because we think that we're truly in a global emergency, and some people have got to come together and put some good minds together with the right vision and the right consciousness to make this change a reality.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm sure you're familiar with the case of Gary McKinnon, who broke into the Pentagon computer back in 95, 96 with a 56K baud modem. But
well, no, actually, that was in 01. He broke in after he heard about the Disclosure Project. And actually,
yes.
I wasn't directly responsible for that, but I was indirectly. He heard about what we had, and you have to understand, if you go to disclosureproject.org, you're going to see testimony, but we have books and videos that have 110 top secret guys, ranking from generals to CIA people to DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, to NASA. And when he saw that, he thought, "Oh my God, this is real!" And so he started trying to get information, and in the process, he hacked into these computers and did see some things apparently. But in fact, I have told his attorneys what he needs to argue is that the projects that he was looking into were illegal projects that are not protected by the rule of law anyway, and the case should be thrown out because. Here's a simple fact. A lot of people have asked me, how have I published these top secret documents? And this, if you go to our website, disclosureproject.org, we just put up there a National Reconnaissance Office secret document from the early 90s that lists the project code names and code numbers.
Oh,
for
wow.
these secret projects, and it's up there for anyone to look at. And people say, how have you done that? I said, because back in 1998, after I briefed Clinton's CIA director, after I briefed the Senate Intelligence Committee people, etc., and I found out that most of these people didn't know about this issue and were being lied to when they asked about it, including the President of the United States and his CIA director, R. James Woolsey. That when I found that out, I said, look, well, these programs, therefore, are unconstitutional and rogue, and they can't cite the National Security Act to protect them. So that's when I started turning to these men and women who are heroes, really, to come forward with documents, to come forward with their testimony and information, because even if they had signed a national security oath or agreement, those were nullified by the fact that this group that is running the secret programs dealing with UFOs and new energy lied to the president, lied to the Congress, and have literally stolen. I mean, Rumsfeld himself admitted around 9/11 that there were $2 or $3 trillion missing out of the Department of Defense budget over the last few decades. Trillion.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that himself. This is Rumsfeld that said this. It's on the record. So, this kind of behavior is illegal, and therefore what I say to people is anyone who has information on this subject or documents should contact me through the disclosureproject.org, and we will take it and put it out to the public.
That's amazing, really. Okay, first of all, what did that guy find?
Which guy?
The guy that hacked into the...
Gary McKinnon.
Yeah, what did he find
Well,
exactly?
I understand that he did see some evidence that there were classified, the Pentagon and NASA objects in space, that there was a sort of a secret space force, which we know about. What a lot of people don't realize is that many of these so-called UFO sightings are actually man-made anti-gravity systems. There are extraterrestrial vehicles, ETVs is what they're called. By the way, no one in the business calls them UFOs. A UFO, that term was invented by people trying to cover this whole thing up. I call them unidentified flying objects. There are two categories of them. One are these things that are man-made.
Dr. Greer, we're coming up to a network
break. The other
break.
are the real ones, the ET ones.
We're coming up to a network break. We'll be right back. TruthFrequencyRadio.com is our website, and we'll see you on the other side, ladies and gentlemen, with Dr. Stephen Greer.
Allà baix dins els canals, en el peu de la muntanya, pareix que sent picarols, suau si es mou sa manada.
And we are back on American Freedom Radio. Our amazing guest, Dr. Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project. And right before the break, we were talking about Gary McKinnon and what he found when he broke into the Pentagon computers. And I think you said, Dr. Greer, there were two types of UFOs that he found, man-made and alien. And I recently heard another term from another guest that we had on, identified alien craft, whatever that means. But we actually...
and this has been the whole problem for years, is that, you get people on this subject and they'll say, well, we don't know what they are, but this simply isn't true. I mean, we have literally hundreds. At this point, I now have over 500 military intelligence and corporate whistleblowers who have been in these projects, who had personal, direct, not secondhand information and documents, and that's what we put together through the materials through the disclosureproject.org and cseti.org, cseti.org. And what people don't understand is that we have been studying the physics dealing with these craft since the 40s, if not before. I know since the 40s and possibly the 30s. There was a general in World War II named General Jimmy Doolittle, and Doolittle was asked by President Roosevelt to go over to the European theater and look into these so-called faux fighters, or Foo Fighters. It sounds like a rock group, but in reality, they were these things zipping around during World War II around our aircraft. The Nazis thought it was a secret American weapon. We thought it was a secret Nazi weapon. And General Doolittle was sent over there by President Roosevelt, came back to the White House and said they are, quote, interplanetary vehicles, I'm quoting. And this is from General Doolittle's nephew, who knew this directly from the general. So our network is so extensive, and what's tragic is that you look at now, we're now 70 years into this, and we're still running around with jet airplanes. And people think, oh, gee, a rocket scientist. Well, a rocket was Werner von Braun in the early 40s for Adolf Hitler. The sciences behind these high-voltage electromagnetic systems that tap into the energy, this so-called interdimensional field of energy, or hyperdimensional physics that we're going to be talking about at this conference in Arizona, October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. It's something that, once people get their minds around it, it's very elegant. And what we're trying to do is get enough people to come together to actually open a laboratory to build these things up independent of Lockheed Skunk Works or the U.S. government. I think that we, the people, have to say, look, it's time for us to do this. And so that's why we formed this third project, the OrionProject.org, is to gather together the scientists and identify the funding to build a laboratory here near the University of Virginia and work on these things independently, because it's, the pressures and the corruption in Washington are so great on this issue that even when Clinton Department of Energy head Richardson approved funding for Ken Shoulders' system that was a sort of a hyperdimensional system that would have neutralized nuclear waste. And they granted, I think it was a couple $1 million to further study this at the University of Illinois. The people in this secret organization circled their wagons and forced Secretary Richardson to withdraw the grant after it was published. This is a proven fact. So it's very difficult to get these things done in Washington because of the clout of these, quote, special interests. And I think we, the people, have to say, look, it's time for us to do this. It absolutely can be done. The physics have been around a very long time. And we have identified a couple of dozen top-drawer scientists who understand the physics of this. And what we want to do is combine them together and build these systems up. And that has to be combined with the consciousness of how to use it. And we talked about this at the beginning, is that you can't just come out with a better mousetrap. You have to come out with a vision of how the world can be transformed through this knowledge and be used peacefully.
Absolutely.
And that's really the conundrum, because if we don't use it peacefully, it's going to be another problem.
You're absolutely right. I've often wondered, any beings that are out there who have this kind of technology have to have a higher state of consciousness and a higher understanding in order to use this technology. Otherwise, they would blow themselves up.
Well, of course, or would have blown up each other's worlds years ago, like we did with mutual assured destruction. Our plans, if we had had a thermonuclear war with the Soviets, it would have ended all life on Earth.
Exactly.
And what people have to understand is that, there's all kinds of stuff in the UFO conspiracy stuff about the good aliens and the bad aliens. And I said, look, any civilization capable of interstellar travel that could get here have technologies, requisite technologies, if they want to use them, to turn the Earth into a pink vapor floating through space, or to turn each other's worlds. The consciousness that must be developed when you go interstellar and can go faster than the speed of light, it requires that there be a corollary in the development of consciousness, because without that, you're absolutely going to have these technologies in the hands of primitives who are going to blow themselves up with it. So, and that's really where we find humanity right now, is that we have a lot of people who are all obsessed with power and centralized power, who have all these wondrous new sciences and technologies, and they have used them to target ET spacecraft and have hit them. This I know for a fact. I have multiple independent corroborating witnesses in the Disclosure Project who have been present when that's happened, and this is a tragedy. But if the ETs were hostile, we would have just simply been toast back about 1947 or 45 when we started.
I completely agree.
There's no question about this, but there's all kinds of fear-mongering that goes on, in my opinion, because the military-industrial complex wants people to be afraid of something else. And eventually they want to play what Werner von Braun warned about, was this sort of cosmic trump card of a threat from outer space. And, obviously there isn't one, or we'd know about it. But people, and even, Stephen Hawking this past summer made this silly comment about, oh, gee, we can't make contact with ETs because they might come here and colonize and take over the Earth. It's a total anthropocentric projection of our own dysfunction onto interstellar civilizations, which doesn't fit with the facts.
Now, we saw a triangle a couple of months ago just hovering over the lake. We were out fishing in the middle of the night, and it seemed to travel almost, it was silly.
Yeah,
it seemed like it was on a string or something like that.
Kind of bulky looking.
Are these man-made craft?
I'd have to have more information. The fact is, it could be. And you have to understand that the silent anti-gravity type, what are called electromagnetogravitic systems, have been developed since the 40s and 50s. In fact, there's a man whose lab we have visited who worked on the coils and the sort of really advanced electronics of these systems back in the early 60s. So we know these have been up and about. And so, whether it was an extraterrestrial vehicle or a man-made one, you'd really have to have more information. Now, one of the interesting things about the ones that are of ET origin is that, number one, they're seamless. Number two, the craft themselves are conscious. They have artificial intelligence to the level that the craft themselves are conscious and aware.
Wow.
And this is why what we're doing with CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, at cseti.org, cseti.org, you can see what we're doing is taking people and training them in deeper, higher states of consciousness, remote viewing, and then turning that into an active process where we contact these extraterrestrial vehicles and vector them or show them where we're located. In fact, in Rio Rico, we're going to do this every night. We're going to go out onto the roof terrace of this resort, and we're going to practice these protocols. Last year, we had this almost tetrahedral-shaped craft begin to materialize right over the group, and in fact, the picture of it's up on our website at cseti.org. And I think what people have to understand is that if you're traveling faster than the speed of light, you are crossing through trans-dimensional space-time where you're in touch with what the mystics used to call the etheric and the astral and the thought realms. And if you're interstellar and going faster than the speed of light, you are as proficient as in terms of your technology interfacing with directed thought as you and I would pick up a cell phone. And so this is a paradigm-busting bit of information for most people, but it's information that really should have been out there 50, 60 years ago. We're really, unfortunately have been miseducated on all of these issues. And I feel people are ready to hear this now. And the thing that convinced me of that was when I was briefing the CIA director for President Clinton back in 1993, and his wife was there, and his wife was Dr. Sue Woolsey, who was the chief operating officer of the National Academy of Sciences, and she turned to me, and my wife was at the table, and she says, well, I'd like to know, how are these beings communicating through these vast distances of interstellar space? And I thought, Jesus, do I tell her a lie and keep my credibility, or do I tell her the truth? And I said, I'm going to tell her the truth. And I told her what I just told you, and that is that there are electronic systems that interface with coherent thought. And what I mean by coherent thought is like a laser is coherent light, and all the wavelengths are synced up. Well, that's what we do with our training protocols to make contact with these ETs, and it has to do with coherent thought from a higher state of consciousness. But I told her that they are doing this through electronics that are very sophisticated, that cross into the so-called thought and etheric and astral dimensions. And she looked at me, and this is the wife of the CIA director, and, she's chief operating officer of the National Academy of Sciences, the most prestigious scientific entity in the United States. And she says, I thought it had to be something like that. It was fabulous. I thought, wow, well, if she gets it, it's time for us to really share the truth about this to people.
Well, really, exactly.
This Sunday, we're having two amazing authors, Dr. Luna and Dr. Frexka, and they wrote a book called Inner Paths to Outer Space, and they claim they can make contact with these beings through psychedelics and things like that. Is there any validity to any of that?
Well, I don't prefer to comment on other people's work. What I would say is that I'm sure that some people have had augmentation using chemicals of various sorts. I think my path, frankly, is the Vedic tradition of the Vedas and Sanskrit. I think that if people understand the power of consciousness and of the meditative state, they can attain to those realms naturally, and it will be a more organic development. And this is not to cast aspersions on anyone else's path. It's just this is the path that I think is safer and healthier and everything else. And that's basically what I train people to do. In fact, we're going to be doing this up on Mount Shasta the Labor Day weekend, and then also in Joshua Tree National Park. In November, if you go to cseti.org, cseti.org, you'll see that we're going to do a training up there. Last year, we actually had an extraterrestrial being come through interstellar space, and we photographed him, and it's up on the CSETI website. It's an amazing photograph, particularly if you look at it on a high-resolution screen.
Oh, wow.
And so what we're finding is that this contact absolutely can be made. And there's a G7 country whose Ministry of Defense and their head of state has asked us to help train their group to do this. So there are people in very high places in other countries, not so far in the United States, who are taking this seriously because they do understand the basic premise that they are here, and if they're here and they're going faster than the speed of light, they're crossing through other dimensions. And when you cross into those other dimensions, you're going to be bumping up against all this other phenomena that deal with thought and consciousness. And at the CIA, actually, there's a man there who is at the desk, what we call WSFM. It sounds like a radio station, and it stands for Weird Science and Frickin' Magic. And I'm not kidding. And that is what the people in the business call it. And he and I have talked about this along with this other scientist who's actually built these systems. And there's no question that when you start dealing with this kind of physics, you're also beginning to deal with the physics of thought and the physics of consciousness. And no less a figure than Dr. Woods, who is a senior McDonnell Douglas aerospace engineer who, at the request of old man McDonald himself, looked into this UFO issue, concluded years ago in the 60s that these extraterrestrial civilizations had devices that interface directly with thought and consciousness in certain states. And when I wrote my comprehensive assessment of this issue in 1991, it's 19 years ago, he read it, and it went all through the aerospace and intelligence community. He turned to me, he says, "How do you know this?" I said, "Because I had contact when I was 18. and there was no doubt in my mind that what was going on was very interdimensional.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, it's in the book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, which is sort of a kind of an autobiography. It's a way of me explaining these issues through my own personal experiences that started when I was young. But when I was 17 in March of 1973, I'm 55 now, so I was still 17 then, and I had a near-death experience. I got very sick. And I was raised an atheist, but what happened in the course of this near-death experience is that I went out, instead of going to some pearly gates with some angry man throwing lightning bolts at people, I went into outer space, and I had this amazing experience of cosmic awareness and unbounded mind, and it was beautiful beyond belief. And even though I was raised to believe there was no afterlife and there was nothing besides what you had in your body, and when this happened, I also had an encounter with a couple of what people would call avatars, very God consciousness beings. And the long and the short of it is, it changed my life. And when I came back to Earth and woke up, and finally I was healed spontaneously, actually, I began to study meditation, and that's when I learned these Vedic approaches to the mantra meditation and what have you that I teach people now. And about 6 months later, I was sitting up on a mountaintop, up in the mountains of North Carolina, and I was doing this meditation, and I had this very deep meditation. I went out into space again, and then at the end of it, I stood up, and there was this little extraterrestrial being beside me, touched me on my right shoulder. And with that, I sort of dematerialized or vanished and went onto this craft with this being, and we basically, it was a meditative experience together. People say, "Why'd you talk about it?" I said, it wasn't linear that way. It was something transcendent. It's very hard for me to explain. But in the course of that, we sort of co-created these protocols that I'm teaching people now about going into unbounded mind, remote viewing deep space, and then showing these ETs, once you see one in your consciousness, where you're located. You can zoom right into, if you're in Michigan, boom, right into the town that you're in or wherever you're located. And I think that this is something that people have to understand. The ETs understand that humans have within us this capability that all conscious beings, and we are conscious, have the ability to experience consciousness in its pure form and then utilize it. And that's what remote viewing and precognition involves. And so this is part of what I'm trying to share with people, and because that's how I got involved. My interest in this started at a very, very young age. And this experience when I was 18 was frankly mind-blowing and beautiful, actually. Nothing frightening about it, except I will say initially I looked over at this creature and I thought, what does this animal want with me? I was an 18-year-old kid. And when I was touched on my right shoulder, I was wearing sort of a ski jacket, and I looked down and my jacket indented, and just seeing that locked it in that this is real and I wasn't imagining it. And then there was this electrostatic field around me, and all my hair stood on end. I had a lot more hair then than I do now. And bam, this whole thing happened where I sort of dematerialized and was in this other state of existence with these ET beings.
Amazing. I've actually, in deep meditative states, I've seen space, so I understand where you're coming from.
Oh, it's beautiful.
It's amazing to hear somebody else saying it, though. I thought it was just in my own mind.
Well, that's really how I got locked onto this whole issue. And of course, my life took other courses, and I got married and had 4 children, and then became chairman of emergency medicine, and became a medical doctor and did all that. But the thing that always stayed in my mind was this vision of the future, where we're going to be interstellar, where we're going to have a civilization without poverty or pollution, and where we're going to really have this whole new chapter, a whole new cycle, if you will, in human evolution, conscious evolution unfolding. And I think that's the time we're in, and that's why a few years ago I left my medical career, because I realized that there's this critical need for people to, first of all, understand this issue in a peaceful paradigm. And secondly, to lay the foundation for these sciences and technologies to come out for safe and peaceful uses, because that really is the future of how we can live on this planet for thousands of years with abundance and in peace. And it's not a pipe dream. It's not sort of a utopian fantasy. These technologies are extant right now. I mean, they're on the earth right now. And it's really, Ben Rich, the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, before he passed away, he was sick with cancer, and he said to 3 people on my team, he said 3 things. Number 1, there are no private conversations anywhere on earth. Number 2, anything you can imagine, we have already done at the Lockheed Skunk Works. And number 3, he says, we already have the technologies to travel faster than the speed of light amongst the stars. In fact, we can take ET home. Now, this is the head of Lockheed Skunk Works saying this.
Wow.
And it's been confirmed by Dr. Hal Puthoff and other people who are also at this meeting. So, people need to wrap their minds around this, the fact that it's a whole new world that's possible, but we're going to have to have the courage to stand up to these, I think, rather fascist interests that want to keep us ground down in poverty and sitting in sackcloth and ashes, rendering ourselves into pieces, when in reality we have the ability to really be liberated, both consciously but also economically and environmentally, because there's no way that we can continue on the path we're on where 7 billion people are burning coal and oil. I mean, look what's happening in China. I mean, talk about an environmental holocaust. But they feel they're wanting to go through their industrialization like we did in the 1800s and 1900s. But you have 1,200,000,000 people doing it all at once. And so, the consequences for the earth of billions of people driving cars and billions of people having electricity from coal and oil are fearsome. It's something apocalyptic. So, and the thing is, we can do better than that, and we will. I mean, it's not a matter of if this is going to happen, it's when. And the when is going to require all of us coming together. And I've been trying to encourage some of these political leaders around the world to do it. I mean, you name the level of leadership in the planet, I've had a meeting with them at some point, literally, royalty, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to belabor my bona fides, but the point is that what's been lacking is real leadership, the kind of moral leadership we need. And that's why we're encouraging people. We have a letter up at disclosureproject.org and also the Orion Project.org, where people can send a fax, a letter to the president and to their members of Congress and say, look, you guys need to deal with this issue and need to deal with it now.
Amazing.
Well, I think the key is convincing the public that are still in a daze that the hero is not the militiaman in the trailer waiting to take on the New World Order with his gun, but the hero is a scientist who's currently being ridiculed and ostracized for his crazy theories about aliens and free energy. How do we get them to believe that?
Of course, the Vatican just recently exonerated Galileo. So, this is the way humans go forward. And I have to say, part of the secrecy, it's not 100% because of science. I had a jet propulsion laboratory scientist, and I was talking to Richard C. Hoagland about this, and he's going to be speaking at this conference October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in Rio Rico. And I said, this jet propulsion laboratory person said, yeah, there are structures on Mars that prove that there's an ancient ET civilization that existed there, and there's an ancient extraterrestrial connection to Earth. And I said, well, why would you guys suppress that? He said, not for the reasons you think. And I said, well, what are they? He said, because if that was known, it would collapse the fundamentalist orthodox belief systems of every religion on earth. Mm-hmm. To which I said, well, good, it's time for childhood's end here, And he said, no, you don't understand the power of those interests. So there is a sort of a weird, sort of misdirected religious basis for the secrecy, as well as a scientific and technological basis, because you really can't believe that we rode around on dinosaurs with saddles 6,000 years ago. Okay, if you find out this information that goes back thousands and millions of years dealing with extraterrestrial civilizations involved with the Earth and Mars and what have you. So this kind of worldview, unfortunately, flies in the face of a lot of powerful interests who want to keep the current myth going. And that's another problem that has to be addressed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they own the media, and so all the people sitting at home, all they hear about is that there's no free energy available, it's never going to happen, you're going to stay slaves forever, and there's going to be a horrible cataclysm in 2012, and it's going to kill us all.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about 2012, in fact, I was asked recently by a politician in Washington about that, and I said, you know what, the Mayan 2012, that was actually the ending of one calendar, but it was also marking the opening of a new era, and it was actually a time of celebration. So it's, you can look at it from the point of view, yes, there's one era that's going to be rolled up and finished. So if you're attached to that, it is the end of the world. But there's another one that's going to be unfurled, and that's the celebration. So both are going on at the same time as sort of parallel events, because for one era to come in, the other one has to sort of recede. And this is one of the problems, is that people take only the sort of eschatology is the study of how the world's going to end, sort of view on this, and it's an incorrect view. Yes, and it's sort of like the REM song that goes, it's the end of the world as we know it, but I feel fine. Mm-hmm. And actually, I was giving a talk once in some place on the West Coast, and there were like 2,000 people in the audience, and I said that, and everyone started singing that song, because it's the end of one whole way of living on the planet that's about division and separation and destruction, but it's the opening of another cycle of unity and universal peace and free energy and advanced civilizations and interstellar travel, and higher states of consciousness. And I think that it depends on where you want to come down on the side of that and what side of that coin you want to look at. And I prefer to look at what's being created, not what's about to collapse.
Religion is definitely one of their primary means of control. What is your take on the ancient astronauts that came? The Sumerian tablets, the fact that the theory that we were created, genetically engineered by these beings.
Well, I don't know if we were genetically engineered. It could be that the gap, the missing link in modern Homo sapiens, may have been an augmentation of other life forms that were already here. But people have to also remember that I think literally there were continents like Atlantis and Lemuria and Mu. I think there were entire civilizations that predate any, that go back millions and millions of years, not 10,000 or 50,000 years, that have existed on Earth. The Earth's been around for billions of years. It's had life on it for hundreds of millions. So I think that there's in fact, I'll tell you a little gem here. There's a top secret scientist that I've worked with very closely, and Dr. Loader and Dr. Bravo and I have met with him. He's been at my home, who does a lot of work for all the three-letter agencies, and he has not infrequently given artifacts from these ancient civilizations to study them and figure out what they were used for and how they work. Some of them are ancient extraterrestrial devices. But some of them are ancient Earth-based ones, the ones that were from other civilizations for which we have almost no trace. Now, this is kept very secret because it would upset, again, everything from archaeology to history to sort of fundamentalist Orthodox religion and what have you. But this man is no quack, and he is absolutely a real guy, and he's currently involved in these sort of projects, and he's shared with me and my team a lot of detailed information that I've had from other people. So yes, I think there have been ancient times where there have been contact, and there's some question whether the Vimanas that are talked about in the Vedas might have been extraterrestrial vehicles, and there are other evidences. I mean, there are ancient cave drawings that are thousands of years old that show things that look just like a flying disc or a UFO that have been documented and carbon dated and proven to be thousands of years old. So I don't think we're dealing with anything new. I think what's new is that we're at a point in our civilization and our conscious evolution where we can understand this in terms of consciousness, but also in terms of science, and make anew the world with this information.
We're going to skip this break real quick. I know we only have you for an hour, so I have one more question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The Norway spirals, your take on that?
I was told about that a week before it happened by two people in the intelligence community. And it was man-made, and it was a display of sort of scalar weapon systems, and it was done over Norway when Obama was getting the Nobel Peace Prize to send a message, a shot across the bow, and that's what the Norway spiral was.
Thank you.
Okay.
For addressing that.
We've had countless debates on this broadcast.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we know exactly what it was.
Okay. Good.
Do they have wormhole technology though?
Well, not particularly. It's really a hyperdimensional electronic system that created that, and it can be weaponized and has been. But it wasn't extraterrestrial. It was very man-made. And one of the things people have to understand is that 60 years and trillions of dollars in a black budget going into this stuff, you got some pretty amazing stuff that's sitting there. And that's what it's a risk and a promise. And the risk is that it can be misused. The promise is that it shows the way to a whole new way of living on this planet if we can use it wisely.
Well, that's what gathered the extraterrestrials. That's what gathered them around, was the whole fact that we created nuclear weapons and we were using them. Isn't that what got them all riled up in the first place?
Absolutely. In fact, a British intelligence agent told me in the 90s that, in fact, when we started detonating nuclear weapons, that we kicked the hornet's nest. That basically, they knew that a big red flag went over the earth that said, look, this civilization now has the ability to destroy an entire world, and at the same time is beginning to go into space. Because remember, from 45 to 55, 60, is when we started going into space, along with the development of these thermonuclear weapons. First the atomic bomb, and then of course, the hydrogen bomb. And I think that what people have to understand is that this caused huge concern in the cosmic order, because not only could we destroy this beautiful planet, but we could be a threat to other planets. And I think that this is what people don't understand. When I met at the Pentagon with senior brass, I said, look, you guys are always looking at what's a threat to us. I think you have to stand in the shoes of these extraterrestrial civilizations and see that we've killed 200 million of our own people in the last 100 years, and now we have the ability to destroy entire worlds, and that we have not learned the lessons we need to learn. And that this is something of, I think, enormous concern to these interstellar civilizations. They're obviously not hostile or violent, or they would have cleaned our clock already. But I think they are concerned about our potential for destruction and hostility that we have not gotten under control yet.
Well, I think they're more concerned with the fact that our spiritual and emotional and mental maturity is not lining up with our technological maturity.
I say that all the time. You're 100% correct. The technological capabilities have outstripped our social and spiritual development, and that imbalance has to be fixed, because otherwise it's very dangerous.
Well, what is the solution, though? You have the people who are in control who don't have the higher consciousness that is needed, and then you have the ones who are very, I hate to say brainwashed, but that's the only word that I can think of, by religion, and they want to go back to the old world and, the old values.
The Dark Ages.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think that what you have to understand is 25%, the Noack Sciences Group did a study back in the 90s, and they found that at least 25% of Americans are cultural creatives who know about this good future and are progressive thinking. So I don't see this as a lost cause at all. And I'll say one other thing, in this group that has been called Majestic or Majestic 12 that keeps a lot of these things secret. When I first briefed CIA Director Woolsey on this in 93, 70% of them were opposed to what I was recommending. Now 70% are in favor.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so there's a third of them, though, who are violent and dangerous, who hate what we're doing. And, you can look at the Internet. I've been called every name in the book. But the point is that, and I don't care. I mean, I'm not running for the mayor of UFO Town or anything else. But the point is that these people really have been evolving, and I don't talk about this publicly that much. I spend a lot of time with people who are tied in to these secret projects, and they are learning and they are evolving along. The question is, it's a power struggle. I lived in Israel for 3 years, where a very small percentage of the population can terrorize the entire population, and so that's true of any subculture. If you look at this group, it's not homogenous at all. So people tend to demonize the whole lot of them. In reality, there are a lot of them who really do want to let this evolve, go forward. But then you got the hardliners, people like Dick Cheney, and who just absolutely don't want this out there and are ruthless. So I think that what has to happen is that there has to be a turning point where the good people have the courage to stand down the mad dogs, okay? And it's a little bit like with the challenge we faced with Adolf Hitler. We let this madman get out of control for too long. And who's going to stand up to these ruthless people? So there's this concept, I call it this Shambhala warrior, the spirit warrior, where no matter what the threat to your life or your safety or your what have you, that you have to stand up to this kind of ignorance and dangerous behavior. And I think that's what the real challenge is as Obama used on the Sunday before his inauguration. I was there when U2 was playing April 4th about Martin Luther King being killed, and I was there with my family on the mall, and on the big jumbotrons were this quote from Robert Kennedy, where he talked about the indispensable quality being moral courage. More than brilliant intelligence, more than anything, is this moral courage. And that's what we really need to have. And that is a spiritual quality, to have the courage to do the difficult things, even if they're extremely powerful and at times ruthless people who would want to stop you. And I think that's what is really the challenge. And it's easy for armchair people to talk about this, but I deal with folks, for example, there's a senior scientist that I met with in Washington recently who was told very flat out that if he talked about some of this stuff publicly, they would kill him, his wife, his children, and his grandchildren. And his wife was with him nodding and said, yep, that's absolutely true.
Oh, my God.
Absolutely true. So, and I've been threatened. And I've said, well, I'm not going to give in to threats and intimidation. And it does wear you down. But it's like the U2 song, let the bastards wear you down. You just have to keep on moving forward.
Absolutely.
I agree.
We can't let them affect any way that we think. I mean, I think that's the whole
absolutely
that's the
not.
Whole goal.
And luckily for me, when I died when I was 17, I had this near-death experience. I learned there was no death. There's no reason to be afraid. And I had the head of Army Intelligence threaten me once. I said, "Go ahead and take your best shot. I'll be more trouble to you on the other side than I am here." So,
that's true.
And he actually knew what I was talking about and believed it. So you kind of have to you have to have this sense of yourself spiritually, where you're not going to be intimidated by the kind of childish antics that go on. But unfortunately, many people in political life, corporate life, many wealthy people I know, they're sort of scared.
They're afraid they're going to get Kennedy'd.
They want to hold on to what they have, and you know what? That's the quickest way to go right down the drain. Just clinging to what you've got. You've got to really kind of let go of all that and move forward and do what you think is right. And that is the more difficult thing. And I, by no means, am any angel. I've got all kinds of flaws. But one thing I will say is that the people on my team that I work with we go the distance no matter what. And I think that that's the courage that has to be evinced, and that's what we're trying to model for folks who are in not only this majestic group that run the secret programs, but also for people in political life and scientific circles. And people like Dr. Loader and Dr. Bravo and other people on my team have spent a lot of time, and their colleagues have really made note of the fact that they are standing tall, even though they've been hit with all kinds of barbs of ridicule and put downs and what have you.
I have a couple of questions from the chat room, if you don't mind, just maybe 5 or 10 more minutes.
Sure.
If time travel is real, and can we use this interdimensional technology? Well, have they implemented this interdimensional technology for time travel?
There is a project, that was called Operation Looking Glass, and another one called Operation Red Light, where they did do a lot of work with altering time and space. Now, the kind of science fiction concept of time travel is not quite like that, although advanced extraterrestrial civilizations have done that, and there are a few notable cases. But I think that, for example, and this is something that most people kind of cringe when they hear me say this story, but the very famous UFO landing at Rendlesham Forest, Mintwaters, back in 1980, I believe it was, and we have a number of officers who were there who are on our team. What really happened, it was a black onyx pyramid-shaped craft that set down, left all kinds of physical traces that the British Ministry of Defense have now admitted. But there were these luminous beams that came out through the side of it. And they were actually us as extraterrestrials from 500,000 years in the future.
Oh, wow.
Coming back to warn us of the dangers of nuclear war, because at that time this was a secret nuclear base, and if the knowledge of that had gotten out, it could have really destabilized the Cold War. And what was interesting is that people say, well, then they weren't ET. I said, yes, they were, but they were humans who had gone from Earth around the cosmos 500,000 years into the future and then time traveled back. So events like that have happened. It's not every day, but it does happen. So that's another thing to throw into this whole mix of the sort of plasticity of time and space, that it's not as fixed and linear as people think it is.
Another question, who is in control of the Earth? Is there like an Illuminati-type group that calls the shots?
Well, as I mentioned, the so-called Majestic Group that deals with these issues and a number of others, it's about 200 or 300 people on a committee. I don't call them the Illuminati at all.
Committee of 300.
And I think a lot of people say, oh, it's the Bilderbergers, it's this one, it's CFR. I said, no. I've met with people in those groups. Most of them come to me to find out what's going on. Okay, so the reality is that the group that deals with these really advanced sciences and issues is a very select group. This group is extremely well controlled, that make policy on this. But again, it isn't a monolith. It's not as if it's actually in very dynamic flux. And one of the things I say to people is that if the people would rise up and move forward on this issue, it would bring more of them along. The other point I make is that people through meditation and prayer can alter that as well. And even though I'm a scientist, I absolutely have seen the sort of amazing things that happen when consciousness kicks in along with science. And so I think that people have to understand that it's not like it's some all-powerful group, and you have to understand the universal mind trumps any kind of little clique of people running around with their boots. So I think that the people get very intimidated by that, and yes, there are very powerful people who have done very ruthless things. And Bill Colby, a former CIA director, was going to hand off to my team one of these free energy devices and $50 million to try to get it initially out to the public. And the week he was going to meet with a member of my board, they found him floating down the Potomac River, and he was definitely assassinated.
Good
and
grief.
Yeah, that's true. And the thing is that it's not like this is not a force to be reckoned with, but it's not an omnipotent force. And people, on the one hand, I'm not going to say it's a paper tiger. On the other hand, I think people shouldn't give it more power than it deserves. And I think that people coming together in a higher state of consciousness has a lot more power than they give themselves credit for. And I think that's something that people have to snap out of, is this idea that, poor little us, we can't do anything. Well, in reality, that's what they want you to believe. And that's what you need to snap out of and wake up from.
What are your thoughts on the moon's It's funny. We had one guest who said that the moon was hollow. Our moon was hollow and actually a spaceship, which had been dug out, and that's why you see all the dirt all around it, because it was actually dug out. And then a few months later, I think it was Richard Hoagland that said Phobos is most likely hollow and a spaceship.
Yeah, there are many people, including some Russian cosmonauts that I had met with back in the mid-'90s, who have told me that Phobos wasn't most likely not solid and may in fact been a very, very ancient artificial satellite. Whether our moon is or not, I honestly don't know. I do know that there are ancient structures on the moon, our moon, as well as ones that look newer. And I know that when we were doing the lunar orbiter mapping of the moon before we landed on the moon in 1969, that we have more than one Disclosure Project witness who have seen those pictures of structures that were in the what's called the terminator area of the moon, but the area between the dark and the light side of the moon, and that these were very large structures, and that some of them were very ancient, some of them looked newer. And this was, of course, would have been in the mid to late 60s when we were doing the lunar orbiter that was mapping the moon prior to the landing. And this one gentleman, Wolf, who's on our team and is one of our Disclosure Project witnesses, actually saw these images when he was at a National Security Agency processing facility at Langley Air Force Base. And I think that what people have to understand is that part of that it built into why we were prepared when we did do the moon landing in 1969 with Neil Armstrong. They had prepared some film footage to download in case there were extraterrestrial vehicles zooming around. And in fact, there were. And they did not want the public to see that, so they spliced in this fake footage, which is why a lot of people think we never went to the moon. We did go to the moon. It's just that the footage, not all of it, is actually what happened.
I agree. I totally agree. I always find that the truth lies right in the middle. And
yep.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not speculating because I've actually spoken to the scientists who dealt with that, and as I mentioned, literally very close members of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin's family have confirmed this to me.
If time, did you ask the one about time travel? Okay. Let's see. I don't know what this question's supposed to be, but it says 9/11 rocket, the disclosure regarding the 2001 National Press Conference a couple months earlier. Does he think the momentum has been regained?
Yes, I know what they're asking about. There was a tragic sort of confluence. The National Press Conference that we did for the disclosureproject.org was on May 9th, 2001. September 11th, just a couple months later, was 9/11. Okay, and one of the things that happened is that as we unfolded the Disclosure Project, there were many, many members of Congress that were inquiring and were moving in the direction of a hearing on this issue, an open hearing. And when 9/11 happened, all eyes dropped off that ball onto this terrorist threat. Now, that was terribly convenient. Now, I can't prove that 9/11 happened because this other issue was about to come out of the sack. I do know that it was a very odd coincidence. Now, certainly, the momentum never was dissipated in reality because the momentum is happening to mass consciousness. If you look at what's happened in the last 8 or 9 years, the French Space Agency has released 100,000 pages of previously classified documents. Denmark has, Chile has, Mexico had a press conference where they had their pilots showing footage of ET craft they were pursuing or that was pursuing them. You have the British Ministry of Defense releasing thousands of documents. There's really been a lot, and in fact the word disclosure has become a buzzword used in the mainstream media and everywhere else. So that sort of, I hate to use the word branding of it, or the sort of concept of it, really has never slowed down. Now, I have to say the official response from Congress was thwarted by that. And because they were so overwhelmed with the fact that we had, the Twin Towers collapsing and the Pentagon in Washington being attacked, that they of course snapped. And that's, whether that was planned or whether that was a very unfortunate coincidence, I can't prove.
Okay. Any more questions, Sheree?
No, I don't think we have any more, but
I have dozens and dozens more, but I don't want to keep Dr. Greer until 6 in the morning.
Well, look, I hope to see you guys in Arizona in October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and people can find out at cseti.org about that, cseti.org, and we're going to go out every night under the stars and practice these contact protocols, and God only knows what will happen. And then every afternoon we're going to be hearing from Richard C. Hoagland and Colin Andrews and Dr. Loder and myself. So it'll be a fun gathering, and I hope some of you folks can make it there with us.
Wonderful. And your websites one more time, please?
It's thedisclosureproject.org and also cseti.org, cseti.org, and that's where you can get the registration information for the conference in Arizona, and also the Joshua Tree week-long expedition we're going to do up in the Joshua Tree National Park in November.
Excellent. You've been an absolutely amazing guest. We really, really appreciate your time, sir.
Really?
Well, thank you. I appreciate your interest.
You have a great
Thank
evening.
you.
Okay, thank you.
And ladies
Bye-bye.
and gentlemen, that was Dr. Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project. Absolutely fascinating guest. I could talk to him for hours and hours. He was giving me goosebumps the entire
broadcast.
I'm a little bit flustered. So let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. TruthFrequencyRadio.com.
We all live in different realities. There's no doubt about that. They're trying to form a one unified reality. But as we start to look towards what we're trying to actually get to, and that is liberty, freedom, justice for all, which is a global cry. We are now knowing from all the internet realms that this is a global cry. It doesn't matter if you're in the Netherlands, in Africa, in Peru, or wherever. We're all saying the same thing all over the globe. All over the globe.
Namah Shivaya. Om Namo, Om Namo, Namo, Namo.
And so you can't reject anything that comes your way. The universe is trying to speak to you and give you what you need, but you're rejecting it because you think you know what you deserve and what you need, which has all been conditioned and programmed by our culture creators, such as Walt Disney, Monsanto, and everyone else. So the answer to our problem is actually invisible, and it is called synchronicity, but it's an answer that no one can show you. No one can show you. And so now we're asking humanity to have faith in humanity when the Dark Brotherhood is making it so impossible to do so. Because we think all of this is our fault. Because we think all of this is our fault. Because we think all of this is our fault. So we need to find that faith in humanity, because listen to all these people that have come out here, every single one of them, a loving, caring, nurturing being that just wants to uplift humanity. Well, that's the majority. Well, that's the majority. Well, that's the majority. The television's telling you the total opposite. Fear those people in a van. Fear, don't go outside. You don't want to be meeting around with people. And that's exactly what you should be doing. And that's exactly what you should be doing. And that's exactly what you should be doing. And that's exactly what you should be. And the synchronicities will start to unfold, and then you'll actually believe in miracles. Anything that comes your way, go with it and do it to your fullest. That's my message to the world, because it'll guide you to your soul's purpose. And if you let your light shine, to your fullest when something comes your way, then it'll magnify and become even more than you ever anticipated. And the best thing is that everything's better than you could have ever dreamed it. Everything's better than you could have ever dreamed it. Everything's better than you could have ever. And I know that's a hard message to sell when the BP oil spill, with the volcanoes, with the corruption, with everything that's going down, the police state, all of it. It's hard to tell people to regain their faith in humanity, to forgive the anger that you have for these people that have trespassed on you, and to just start seeking the new existence. But we have to. That's what we have to do. We're the voice now. We're the voice now.
And that is what we have to do, ladies and gentlemen. It's all about a global shift in consciousness to move on to the next level, because that's really what it's going to take. And just like Dr. Greer said, it's that time. It's time to explore space and have this higher understanding and have the technology, which in essence isn't going to blow ourselves up. So joining us on the line, we have somebody who's running around trying to expand the consciousness of everybody, and I really look up to this woman. She's out there making a difference, really. Karen Quintostado is joining us. Karen, are you there?
Hi, Chris. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us, especially last minute like this. You've been doing some amazing
Literally.
things. Yes, I know. You've been doing some amazing things out there to expand the minds of people and expand their consciousness. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Well, it's actually through the process of expanding my own and having the courage to follow where my research led, which is not what most people out there are thinking of. And it just seemed to me that it was such a corrupt system of government that we had, that the best way to deal with it was to not deal with it and to withdraw our support from governments gone wild globally, because it's not just a problem in America, but it's a problem all over the world. And when you trace it, you find the same dominant, insane minority in the background, controlling the money, controlling religions, controlling our consciousness deliberately through dividing us down so many different pathways that it's difficult to know just where to go. And once you start down the rabbit hole, it is never ending.
Absolutely. Cherie?
Well, I think you're completely correct in that assessment, because our government hasn't been doing anything for us for a very, very long time. It's just now that people are starting to wake up and say, hey, wait a minute, they're not helping us. They're helping themselves 3 times over. I mean, why else would $2 trillion be missing from the Pentagon except that they're using it on black ops and things that they want to do for themselves? They're not doing anything for us.
They're distracting us. They're distracting us from thinking for ourselves. They've trained us so well. They've taken our power. They've trained us to give it to them and to play by their rules. Even though they break every rule in the book, they still have trained us to wait until November thinking that there's going to be a change when, we might as well wait for Santa Claus. It's a rigged game.
Yeah, it is. It is. And you don't realize it until you get older, usually. When you hit around 50, 55, somewhere around there, then you start to wake up a little bit and you're like, what is going on with our government? But most of the time, up until the past couple of years, people just would say, oh, well, the government's just the way it is because I should run for mayor, but I'm too tired. And what's ended up happening is there's been just a wonderful awakening in the past couple of years, though, where people like you and people like me and Chris have just gotten involved. I mean, however you can, get involved, find out what your niche is, and do it. Do it because the government and the leaders that we have right now aren't going to do it for you.
Right, and we're paying them. And so it just, for me, the more I learned, the more I recognized that silence is compliance. And so I started trying to pound the awareness drum, saying, look it, your taxes on your 1040s are voluntary. Did you know they were voluntary? Because I learned very quickly I couldn't tell people not to pay taxes due to the mafia-style tactics that go on by the real terrorist organization in America, the IRS. And that morphed into taxfree15.com, and we successfully had a strike back in April, and I want to thank both you and Chris for helping me promote that, because from that grew the seeds of international support. And now the website we have is unitedwestrike.com. And we have broadcasts now because the 15th of the month is the day that we continue to encourage people to have a corporate economic boycott at the very least. But the real goal is for folks to understand that as long as we go about our lives as usual, as long as we go to work, as long as we send our children to school, as long as we pay our bills, as long as we pretend everything is okay, is as long as they can keep on eviscerating our economy and stealing from right in front of our noses. So if we take a day a month to pull out of the system and to unite with people all over the world, because this is a global problem. It is us against the dims, the dominant insane minority who think they're so illuminated, but they are coming from fear, they're coming from lack. Unfortunately, though, they've paid the military. They are behind the wars, but we're the ones who they've trained to participate in the wars. We're the ones who kill each other. We're the ones they train to be IRS agents. We are the ones who are enforcing absolutely horrible edicts upon one another. And when we finally really get that, when we stop allowing ourselves to be trained, and when we pull out of the system for at least one day, even if it's just to save your money, not spend it a bit in corporations, but when we pull out and then we envision gathering around the computer and listening to people in different parts of the world. We had our broadcast last time started off the first 2 hours in German. We have a lot of support in Germany. We have people in different parts of the world who are really coming on board. And if folks go to UnitedWeStrike.com and to the International Partners page, they can see that support. They can see the flags. We want people to download the logo so it pops up everywhere as a sign of peace and unity and global noncompliance, because ultimately there are over 6 billion, almost 7 billion of us running around in circles, fighting with each other, using depleted uranium. We heard a Marine the other day talking about a landing craft that cost $24 million, and they want numerous landing crafts, and yet we're losing our homes, we're losing our families, our children, we're losing everything, but our government spends billions and billions a week on war. All over the planet, people are losing. In Greece, they have to sell off the Greek islands now to make up for the debt. A lot of folks don't know that here our natural resources have already been
sold,
promised. Yeah, to the Chinese, here you go, here, let's pay for the debt. And instead of doing this, all we have to do is stop playing their game and recreate a future we can all live in and with. And that's really the purpose behind this, is just letting folks know we're equal. We're equal. Those in power are not more equal than we are, or less equal, but they're certainly not deserving of our money, because they've proven time and time again that they have sold us out. And unless we come to that realization and stop supporting us, we'll continue to be flushed, just like they did to the Gulf, and all of the horrible loss of life that we still have not even begun to scratch the surface on.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What do you do, though, when people say, oh, well, you're just being negative? Why don't you think positive about your slavery?
Well, why don't I think positive about what?
About your slavery, about the way things are. That's just the way things are. You're just being negative. What do you say to those people?
I am being positive.
Yeah,
I'm being
there you
positive,
go.
thinking about a future I can create, as opposed to the negative one that I'm supposed to be buying into, that I don't buy into because I'm not going to go to the polls. I met Bev Harris from blackboxvoting.org, and she's a woman from Seattle. She's a grandmother, and she discovered how easily the black boxes are hacked into that are counting our votes. And, you know, how can we think that our votes count when they're using machines, which are actually against our freedom anyway, to be able to vote? You know, it's a rigged game. You got corporatists, you got lobbyists. The power structure is so uneven in terms of what a citizen can actually do, that it's beyond repair, in my opinion. It's a bloated parasitic cancer that needs to wither and die from lack of support while we create other systems, like starting with our county sheriff. Now, there's a vote that can be counted, as long as the people make sure that it's counted. We must become involved in our communities and rebuild that way from the inside out, because the rest of it is just a bunch of horse crap.
You're absolutely right about that. I think it was Mussolini that said, it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes.
Stalin,
that's it. Yeah, and we're seeing it time and time again. I mean, with the Ron Paul campaign, a lot of people in New Hampshire were coming out and saying, hey, wait a minute, I voted for Ron Paul, and there's no votes in my district. And more people started stepping forward. And you know what they did? They just turned around and said, oops, we made a mistake. Let's go back and recount. Okay, he got 4 votes here. He got 6 votes here.
Oh, yeah. People are disenfranchised on purpose as well. And to me, when you really start to see just what a complete circus it is, and a show. I was an entertainer for years. I recognize that it's a great show, but it's divided us into these opposite camps where we call names at each other, where we say, oh, well, it'll change now if we get Republicans back. Well, come on. All sides are really working toward global government, and that's where we the people still have to recognize that, not to mention in these times where money is tight, where people are losing jobs, trying to raise money for campaigns, millions and millions of dollars for campaigns that people send out, here's $25, but that $25 could go much further in our own homes. Let's buy some storable food or some seeds for the garden. Instead of putting so much energy out there being totally distracted from living our own lives, thinking, well, if I work 10 to 12 hours a day on this campaign, and a lot of really good people are doing this, but to what end in a rigged game? I just don't get it. Or maybe I do get it, and that's why I'm not playing.
But we need to have this mentality every day, though, not just once a month.
Exactly, but it's difficult to get people to unite. And, too, I hope that you and Cherie can be part of it, at least later on. We also are thinking, wouldn't it be great to have simulcasts all around the world in Patriot stations on the same day? Letting people know, yeah, we are on the same side. Instead of standing behind people going, yes, protect me, we need to stand shoulder to shoulder and face our opposition, which are just the criminals right now who are in office. And instead of showing up to the biggest party president ever, and thinking that he's so cool, we should ignore him. We should be living our lives. We should be trying to figure out where we're going to be the next 6 months to a year, and how best to make sure that we've got food and water, because it will get tough. And if you don't want to be in a FEMA camp and you don't want to continually be giving your power away, then you need to pull it back in, think for yourself, question everything. We've got to learn to be skeptical, but we've just been spoon-fed this dogma from our parents, who loved us and did the best they could, because they were also spoon-fed the dogma. And it's time to, drop the spoon and start actually really looking around and digging deeper and finding out why we believe the way we believe, and whether or not it is to serve us or to continue to serve the small, dominant, insane minority who profit off of war and are continuously working toward that, as well as poisoning our food, our water. Now lithium to be put in our water. I mean, it just is absolutely beyond acceptable. And to think that we have to still play.
They're putting lithium in the water now?
They're talking about putting lithium in the water.
Good
I think
Lord.
in some places they have. That's on Infowars.com. Yeah, whatever they can put in the water to make us not think for ourselves, to go back to helping to calcify the pineal gland, so they cut off the spiritual center so that they can stop us from raising our consciousness.
Well, lithium is used to keep bipolar people from going crazy, but if you gave it to a regular person that didn't have bipolar disorder, it would turn them into a zombie. So that's why.
Well, there's a great movie. Have you guys seen THX 1138?
No.
It's an early movie that was, I think, George Lucas's one of his first ones. Stars Robert Duvall, and it's an interesting look at a future that I'm sure the Dims would like us to have, where you can get in trouble for drug evasion, and you have it's pretty much asexual. You don't have real marriages or anything. You're just a number. You're just a human resource, which is what they see us as anyway.
And then some guy that looks like Shakespeare talks to you to try to cheer you up, and he speaks in this monotone voice and just says, "You are loved. What is wrong with my child?" And you tell him what's wrong, and then he doesn't even answer the question. He just says, "Don't worry, everything will be fine. Just, I'm going to put you on some more of this medicine, and then you have to take the medicine or you go to their jail." So
it's kind
really
of
weird.
like that, although they've got like a picture of Jesus in the background. You go into your own little confessional, but it's still a tape recording, and it just plays over, and
Yep.
you just kind of confess, and then you go home and take your drugs, and you work on creating the robots that continue to enslave you.
Yep.
And the children are taken off into other little rooms, for their own education. It's so crazy out there now. If you really step back and turn off your TV, that's something too that I don't think folks understand, just how it's not called programming for nothing.
Oh yeah,
And a lot
it's
of what they're
predictive
seeing.
programming.
Yeah, and they've got subliminal things in there, and people are just so tired, and they're working so hard that it's understandable how they don't want to see beyond what is right in front of them. And even when they do see what's right in front of them, like 9/11, they still refuse to believe their eyes. Instead, they'll believe, that, it was the jet fuel.
Yeah,
Islamic terrorists.
They're exactly. You're right. They're so tired with their day-to-day life, and the kids are running around screaming their heads off, and dinner needs to be made, and your husband's about to come home from work, and everything needs to be clean before he gets home. So 9/11 is going to be the last thing on their mind. And I think that's the whole point of this corporate reality that we live in, where we have to go to Walmart before we can go home because we don't have anything to make at home to eat. And so we have to go to these corporate stores in order to even eat. And
well, I'm drinking out of a sports bottle right now, and on the label it says BPA free. This is where we've come to. We've come to where advertisement says BPA free.
Or 100% cheese, 100% real cheese, or 100% real meat, when really it's only about 1%.
Yeah, it's a cloned mad cow burger. And the BPA free could actually mean, with their doublespeak, that no problem, the BPA in this is really free. We're not charging you for it.
Well, when they put 100% real beef, all they need is a little bit of 100% real beef to call it 100% real beef.
Wow.
It is getting absolutely crazy with the food out there. Yeah, I'm thinking that more and more we just need to consciously bless our food and understand that we're all created from that same divine essence, and put our own positive spin on it. And I don't know if you've seen photographs of food that's been prayed over. I have, and there's such a difference. The plate beforehand, the food is just, it's got a little bit of an energy pattern around it, but after a blessing, it's like a little plate of sunshine.
Yeah.
It really.
Prayer does work. My grandparents pray before every meal, and I was pretty healthy growing up. I mean, I had some problems, but I didn't get sick like with bacteria and viruses as much as other kids. So yeah, I agree.
Who are you praying to is the question, though.
Well, I think the whole thing with prayer is to be grateful. And actually, I pretty much believe that it's that same divine essence. We just dress it up in different suits and give it different languages and traits. But it's all the same. The same core energy that we were created from is what is running throughout the universe. And there's so little we know about how much magic and miraculous behavior that we're capable of because we've been, stifled and stymied and lied to and manipulated since before we were born.
And told that we have no power and that there's never going to be any power for us, and that the only way to get power is to lie and manipulate people and cheat them and run for mayor.
Well, also you think about all the people who are living to die. They feel so strongly that the only way that they're going to ensure their eternal salvation is to live a life of subservience, kind of denial. Yeah, well, that's bad. Well, I can't dance. God doesn't like it if I dance, and God doesn't like it if I wear jewelry or makeup. We
because
put these.
One chapter in the Bible where it said it was
ourselves.
bad. Yeah, exactly. It's a self-defeating type of mechanism that they've installed in us somehow, and it's made girls want to be skinny as a rail. It's made guys want to be that guy from Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. It's made our whole society screwed up. The self-hating mechanism.
Well, and we hate ourselves for lots of reasons too, but I think one of the biggest disservices that religion does is to make us feel so unworthy. I know that I was raised Catholic, and you're born with original sin on your soul, and you have to be baptized, and I don't really mean that to sound disrespectful, but it is a great tool for teaching guilt, for teaching. You're never good enough, and you never will have all the answers. You're just supposed to show up every Sunday and donate your money to the Catholic priest to make sure that they have enough money in the Vatican to pay for the lawsuits when their pedophilia gets a little out of hand.
Exactly, and they're really good at doing that to girls. I've noticed. Little boys aren't as easy to manipulate emotionally, but the little girls are very, very intuitive, and they want to please people so bad that they end up being zombies for the rest of their lives because they were taught to be that way.
Well, it's all by design too. I mean, they suppress natural human instincts and emotions, and then when they grow up and realize, hey, there's nothing wrong with this, then they go wild.
They go completely
and they
to the other end of the spectrum.
Exactly.
Yeah, and they start becoming whores, and they act out in those kinds of ways because they weren't taught a healthy medium, a healthy balance between the two, and so they think they either have to be a nun or they have to be a whore.
Well,
here's no in between.
Here's a good example. Here in the States, we have a lot of teenage drinking problems, and the kids don't know how to drink here. They'll drink, until they're laying down on the ground throwing up. And in Europe, where there's no alcohol limit, you rarely have that. The kids drink responsibly, even if they do drink. But a lot of them will say, no, I'm not going to drink until I get older, just because. But
it's not good for your brain.
I was going over there, 15-year-old cousin, having a beer at the table, and that's it, one beer. It wasn't excessive over and over and over again, but that's what happens when you restrict these kind of things.
Well, it is, and also we're trained globally to believe that we need to belong to these religions to save our souls. And I think that that's been just a huge disservice to people, because instead of recognizing that we all are individual aspects of this divine essence, and that it runs through us equally, and instead of parents going, wow, we're so happy you're here, we're here to guide you and to see just what gifts you have to offer the world, welcome to the family, and then to actually teach them how to walk, how to talk, how to garden, which is something that we all should learn how to do, but it's been kind of channeled out of us. Instead of having those kinds of really wonderful, expansive creations, instead it's like, don't do that. no, I think, is the first word that most children learn. And you're not good enough, and you got to come to church, and you have to do this, and God has to tell you. When God speaks to each one of us in our hearts, and we all can tap into that. But the powers that be, those DIMS, didn't want a lot of people running around who were self-actualized, because then they couldn't control us. So if they can get you before you're even born, with pregnant mothers taking their children to church, and then taking your babies and getting your babies baptized, and then it's every Sunday, and there's so many rules and regulations that are not really thought about. And in the Catholic religion too, priests giving advice to married couples and marriage counseling, and what the frack does he know about it?
Right, exactly. It's a rigged game. It really is. And it's rigged to make you think that you are constantly on the edge of losing your soul and losing your afterlife if you screw up. And if you do screw up, then you have to go to church and you have to tell somebody. It's this rigged game where you're always telling on yourself and defeating yourself, and you think that you have to follow all these rules or you're not going to get to heaven. And it's a really sick system. Whenever you finally get out of it and then you stand back and you look at it, you're like, oh that's sick, But when you're in it, you can't see it.
Well, and there are a lot of really wonderful people who are just totally brainwashed into it. And it's understandable, it's regrettable. I in no way think that I am any better than anyone who believes that. I'm just on a different path. I really like Neil Donald Walsh's work with, some religions that will tell you this is the only way. I know that my father, boy, if you didn't read the Douay version of the Bible, and when you're Catholic too, you're not really required to use the Bible or to read it. Instead, you have your missals and you have your other little specialty books there that tell you what to do for different holy days and all the rest of it.
Yeah, that's why I don't even think Catholicism is Christianity. I'm sorry. The whole thing's kind of weird to me.
Well, let's not even talk about, all the attention we pay to old men who dress up in Dagon, Babylon fish heads and
Thank you.
long white dresses and carry upside down crucifixes.
And they display, the corpse of Christ, year round for everybody to see. They don't even mention that, he was resurrected, and then putting his body, quote unquote, his body and his blood out for everybody to drink and eat. It's just, there's something weird about that. So.
Well, and then when you look into the history of the Jesuits, who are like the military arm of the Catholic Church, and the Black Pope, and it gets very, very convoluted.
Very dark.
And then you add onto that Child Protective Services. Yeah, it is dark. It is dark, but it's also so in your face that ultimately more and more people are waking up. Although there was a YouTube that a friend of mine sent me the other day called, I think, The Seven Veils, and it talked about the different veils that you have to lift in order to try and really wake up, and how only 10% of the people will go from the first veil to the second veil, and then only 10% of people who see through the second veil will go to the third veil, and then only 10% of that number. So you really have a diminishing number of people who actually are starting to see through what's happening. And that is, I guess, just the way it is. I was also listening to Schaefer Cox earlier, who says, you have to accept the loss. You have to accept that not everybody's going to get it. You have to concentrate on the people who do get it. And I personally like the idea of the light, of knowing that as I try to be better myself, and I'm just thinking now, I broke the first of the 4 agreements, which is be impeccable with my word, because I have been kind of disrespectful when talking about the Catholic religion and some of the other religions. And it's, I'll tell you, when I try and live by the 4 agreements throughout the day, I'm so busy monitoring myself, I don't have time to mess with somebody else. And if we all did that, if we all tried to be impeccable with our word and not use it against people, to not take things personally, to not make assumptions, and always do our best, our world would be such a better place.
You're
There's
on,
oh, okay.
Yeah, it's your end.
Sorry. I agree, but it's not that simple all the time. I mean, I wish it was, because, like, they did a video called Stress Portrait of a Killer. PBS did a special on it. And it talked about how monkeys, if they put a bunch of monkeys together in too tight of a space and they were all working together and living together, they were constantly stressed out to the point of where they were having heart attacks, they were sick all the time, they, had slower brain growth, they had problems, with the dopamine in their brains. It was just insane how much stress can affect a person. And even monkeys will do it if they're too tightly packed into a social structure that's, highly developed. I mean, for monkeys, they had a pretty developed system. There were the mean male monkeys at the very top, and then there were the nice male monkeys below them, and then the female monkeys. And those poor male monkeys that were at the bottom, they were dying right and left from stuff that we die of when we're stressed out. And so I think part of this goes back to being alone, having the ability to be left alone for a little bit by yourself so you can think, so you can just think about things without any music in the background, Lady Gaga singing her crap, anything like that. Nothing in the background, just you yourself, thinking original thoughts, having an original mind. That is what the world needs right now. It doesn't need the same memes and crap poured out of the mainstream media anymore.
We definitely need to take time for ourselves, and that's also part of the idea on the 15th, is to take some time. And we're going to have at least 12 hours, if not 14 hours of programming from different parts of the world. And it's taking time out from the rest of the world to tune in to what those of us who are starting to wake up and starting to try and figure out how best to recreate futures we can all live in. It's a place for us to come together, but definitely people do need to take time out for themselves. And it was a couple of years ago, and I don't know if you ever saw this, but there was a cartoon on Saturday mornings, and I was flipping around the channels, and it was called Tutankhamun. And it was a little cartoon about a little pharaoh, a mummified pharaoh, but he's like a child pharaoh. So he's just this little guy who sleeps in a bigger sarcophagus in this museum.
Aww.
And he's got all these adventures, but he was pretty cute. And his friend came to ask him what he was doing that day, and as he popped out of the sarcophagus, he said, "Well, I started off by paying homage to the sun god Ra, and then I basked in my own glory until noon."
Sounds wonderful.
And now, how cool is that? If all of us could actually bask in our own glory, if we all believe, because now when you get to be an adult, when you start using your head, you have the ability to choose what you believe. And I know that something that really helped me was when I chose to believe I was created from the source of all love. And that made such a difference.
Absolutely. Karen, can you spit out your websites real quick in the last 10 seconds?
UnitedWeStrike.com, taxfree15.com.
Thank you so much
Karen.
for joining us last minute. We'll see you on Saturday, 7 o'clock Central, ladies and gentlemen.